Hello, everybody. Yes, so in the grant, it basically says plant trees to green things a little bit. And so what I'm going to try to do is add some depth to what we can do with trees and with compost as a part of this project and within our communities. The work that I've been doing for the last decade plus in Sacramento has been as an urban agroforester, being kind of the fruit tree specialist, thinking about perennial, long-term relationships to our urban ecosystem, to the culture of place. And in that process, I've got to work with a lot of fruit trees in a lot of different contexts. I've led CAL FIRE-funded planting programs. I've been the fruit tree partner for a lot of organizations, including the Sacramento Tree Foundation. And so what I'm going to do as a part of this grant is provide a lot of that experience of how to do this well and of how to care for trees well so that they actually survive. Tree planting programs, you know, you hear, trillion trees, we're going to save the world, we're going to end climate change, and then 80% of the trees die in 5 years. Because they're just planting trees for the sake of planting trees, and they're not putting, in the tree world, we have a slogan, right tree, right place, right reason. And so it's about the tree you're picking for the context it's in. It's about the soil and the condition it's in and the preparation you do and the care you provide it. It's about the way that young tree is stewarded during its initial years when its scaffolding, its long-term woody superstructure is developed. And if that's a weird, goofy structure, your tree is going to have a sad, short life. And the real benefits require care and stewardship. So we're going to talk a lot about that. And throughout the life of the grant, I am going to be your support system. So in many of your communities, I am going to come out this winter and we'll do a hands-on fruit tree pruning and fruit tree planting training. We'll look at how to care for existing trees, how to help your trees that are maybe a little bit awkward. Maybe they didn't get all that care in the first few years. How to prune a tree to reestablish a good foundation, to clean out the dead wood, to take out the risk factors for its reduced life and functionality, and get it in the best foundation we can. So I'm going to run through a little bit of my background. I'm going to talk about the tree planting part of this program. We're going to talk about how to design trees into your site design that you're going to be thinking about this weekend, and all the different things you could think about. And then I'm going to talk about the tools online that are available to help you select a tree. Because any question that's in your mind right now about what tree do I want, a lot of people have asked that question before, and good people have created resources. Just like the app that we just saw. It's like, oh, somebody ought to do something about that. And they said, hey, we're somebody. Let's do something about that. The tree world is full of people like that. So we have resources that are available around fruit trees, and we have resources that are available around landscape trees, native trees. How to plant each of them, it's different. How to care for them, it's similar but different. And the different reasons you might choose a tree. So I'm going to show you a bunch of those different resources. And then after this conference, you're going to receive a PDF document from me that will be a list of all these resources with live links so that you can just click on them and go to these pages and explore these resources and learn about all the great things that are out there to help you be successful with this part of the program and enhance and expand the benefits to your community, both your physical site and to all the different relationships that that site has to the community that it's in. All right? Let's go. All right, so that's kind of what I just told you. This is what we're going to do together. We'll talk about the data side of this as well. There is a tree data piece for the regional coordinators, and we'll look at that as we go. So as she said, I had a job where I was the Edible City Coordinator. And so from 2011 to 2017, I was with Soilborne Farms, which is the big community farm in the Sacramento region. And they run all kinds of different programs in schools and farmer training and farm tours. And I was the neighborhood food systems element of that. So it was based in a program called Harvest Sacramento that was a fruit gleaning program. Gleaning being, hey, there's extra fruit on the tree, Somebody ought to do something with that. Hey, I'm somebody, we're somebody together. There's hunger over here. There's underutilized fruit resource over here. How do we link those together? The default setting of our society is there is a cultural absence of capacity to link those things together because we only do things generally if there's a commercial mechanism for it. And so gleaning has been kind of a peasant skill set. The farmer has picked its commercial crop, and there's still food, but it doesn't make sense for the labor cost to go get it. So then the peasants would come in, and we're talking like back in the day, way back in the day, lots of human history. And then there's all this food that had a lot of benefit to people. They could do a non-commercial harvest and utilization. So in a community context, we would get volunteers out during particularly citrus season. Sacramento is blessed with giant, ancient citrus trees. In my backyard in Oak Park, I have an 80-year-old grapefruit tree that's nearly 40 feet tall. In a good year, it puts out 1,000 pounds of fruit. You cannot harvest the top of the fruit. It's up there for the squirrels to throw at you. But we use painter poles that would extend from 6 to 12 or 8 to 16 feet with a fruit basket on it, and that much an orchard ladder. We could harvest the bottom half of the trees like that size that are in the old neighborhoods in Sacramento, and we might get 500 pounds off of a tree. We'd get 50 or 80 volunteers out on a Saturday morning every weekend, January, February, March, April, and we might get 3,000 to 10,000 pounds of fruit on that Saturday morning. And that resource capability is a practice that we then looked at. How do we reconnect people to their neighborhoods that they live in together and the land that they share together? And so it became, I nested a bunch of what we call kind of nature connection practices into it that are, if you look at where our brains evolved, we evolved in villages with small communities, multi-generational families living on a landscape together with deep, intimate knowledge of that landscape and how to live there seasonally and rhythmically well together. Modern people, we don't know how to do that stuff. We're domesticated. We buy stuff that comes from other places. Sacramento's farm to fork. Have you guys heard Sacramento's the farm to fork capital of the solar system? Of the known universe? It was made up by the Convention and Visitors Bureau, so we can put whatever scale we want on it. There's no basis of it. It's just a claim. It's a potential. And that started because the six-county region, in research done by the Regional Council of Governments in 2010, found that in the Valley Delta foothills around Sacramento, one of the great ag regions on Earth, 98% of what we grow, we export to the world food system. And of the food that we eat every day that nourishes our bodies, well, 98% of that we re-import from the world food system. We're a giant company town. And what that means is we inhabited this place without a plan for how to live here. We just learned how to extract value and export it for money to then re-import food to survive, like a mining town would do, or a logging town. It started with furs during the Great Fur Rush in the 1820s, then the Gold Rush, then wheat from the Central Valley that was fed to the British peasants in the Birmingham factories under the coal snacks, that like slop they were eating, or like porridge, that was California wheat. So it's a long-term pattern. We don't know how to live here well. And that was really the basis of Harvest Sacramento, is we have to figure out how to re-inhabit our neighborhoods. We have to figure out how to change those relationships, to reconnect the place, to understand the natural and indigenous history of this place. How did people live here well together for the 10, 15,000 plus years they were here before the gold rush, before this was Mexico for 20 minutes and then California? We don't really have that memory, because if you think of most people who live in this area, their families came here 1 generation ago, 2, 3. They don't have ancestors in this land. They don't have memory of this land. They've never had to live in a way that cared for and stewarded this land in a way that was an honor to their ancestors and a gift to their descendants. We're not in that kind of creative relationship to our place. So that's really been the basis of my work with Harvest Sacramento, and the work I've done subsequently, is looking, all right, we don't know what we're doing. Cheap energy has subsidized foolish behaviors that we have allowed to atrophy every bit of inherited wisdom that our ancestors accumulated in other lands at other times, that we've maybe brought a little bit of here. Maybe some of you still have sparks of it, but it's unexpressed. It has nowhere to ground and generate and share and collaborate. And so the idea is that we have to figure out how to live well together in our places in an awkward period of human history, where the consequences of many of the imbalances that exist within our economy and our climate and our relationship to the planet and our geopolitical relationships, like turn on the news, we are in a very awkward phase. This is the consequences phase. Welcome everybody, we live in the future and things are happening. And so the idea here is that compost and trees are great ways to reground ourselves in place, to reintegrate into the rhythms of life, the cycles and relationships that exist in our place, and to learn to again become a beneficial part of that ecosystem. And we get to do that with all these interesting people whose ancestors came from all over the world to this place, and we get to do it together and figure out what that looks like on our sites, in our neighborhood context, as regional networks, and as a statewide network. So whereas compost is like this nexus between life and death, a bridge between the cycles, we can layer all kinds of other beneficial activities into that space. And so that's the way the tree element of this program provides us a chance to start looking at that. And potentially we can build partnerships in our communities that can extend that out further. So let me introduce you to someone here. Anybody know what country this is?
Agreement?
Yes! And any other attributes?
A big one.
A big one.
An old tree.
An old tree. This is Il Castagna di Cento Cavalli.
Translation?
This is in Sicily, near Mount Etna, and this is the chestnut of 100 horses. It is the oldest chestnut tree in the world. It is thought to be as much as 4,000 years old.
How tall is she?
I don't know exactly how tall, but in girth, it's the largest tree in the world. It's a clonal network now. The original trunk failed, but it is, I think it was 60 meters in diameter. Maybe circumference to get around. It's huge. The Princess of Aragorn and her 100 horses of her knights and traveling companions sheltered under it during a rainstorm, and that's where it got its name. And so the idea here is that fruit trees and nut trees and useful trees are long-term relationships. And if we plan our places well and steward our land wisely, we can be a blessing to future generations. We may inherit some of these trees, like the grapefruit tree in my backyard was planted around World War II. This tree gives you a sense of how long a nut tree can live. There are olive trees in the Mediterranean that are up to 3,000 to 5,000 years old. There's a pear tree in Massachusetts that the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony brought as a cutting from his estate in England to Massachusetts, and it's still there. It's over 400 years old. So when you plant a tree, you want to do it thoughtfully. You want to think about, what is this tree going to do, not just today, but what is it going to become in its fullness? We call this four-dimensional thinking, time and space. How is this going to expand over time? How is the sun going to change? Did that just drop out? Am I talking to myself?
I can hear you.
All right.
We can hear you in the back.
All right. Somebody wants to fix this, they can fix it, otherwise.
They're bringing it
All right.
There you go. Another one.
Hey, I'm back. All right, well, I'm going to take this opportunity to drink a little water, and then we'll continue. Just gaze upon the tree before I move beyond it. And so, I share this tree with you both because the patterning of trees and long-term thinking is really crucial. We have a very short-term focused culture. We don't think long-term. We don't plan long-term. We don't invest in the right parts of the system to sustain the young trees, to get them into a good foundation for the future. And right now, in our urban forests, we're not really taking care of the old trees very well. And so there's a lot of consequences. Sacramento, I remember last year, in the winter in January, when we had those thunderstorms and it got super windy, it was like 70, 80 mile an hour gusts, over 1,000 major old trees fell. And part of the reason they fell is because we managed the land for mow and blow intentions, which means minimize labor costs and maintain a base level aesthetic. It does not mean ecological function. So shallow, frequent lawn irrigation, terrible for trees. No mulch, no leaves, no cover for the ground, terrible for the trees. That's our normal baseline way that we manage these landscapes. So those long-term relationships, I have two places of inspiration to share here for a change of that dynamic within our culture. So we'll start on the right. M. Cat Anderson's Tending the Wild. This is about California indigenous land management over the last 10,000 years. Cat Anderson interviewed the elders of the tribes of Northern California a generation ago to catch the stories that they still had in their memory of their pre-contact elders. Because one of the things we don't often think about here is how recently this place became civilized. So first contact in Sacramento that we have knowledge of, 1825, not quite 200 years ago. Jedediah Smith and a band of fur trappers on the American River. So that's really recent. Because if we look on the left side, landscape and change in early medieval Italy, this is about the chestnut culture of the Italian Alps. This is what my family comes from. We're from a village in the Val d'Aosta in the Alps, and this is a multi-thousand-year stable culture of peasant agroforestry embedded in forests of giant trees that create nuts that you can bake bread from. They're a storage crop. So before there were polenta Italians with corn, or risotto Italians with rice, or pasta Italians with wheat, there were chestnut Italians. All the way back to the Germanic tribe that fought the Romans that my ancestors come from. My name Allamano comes from Alemanni, a Germanic tribe. The word German, Allemann, Alemannia, derives from that. So think about it this way. Thousands of years ago, my ancestors are fighting the Romans and all the people from Europe and the Middle East. That discontinuous event of the people in the land occurred so long ago that it's forgotten. 200 years ago is when that discontinuous event occurred here. So the people in California on the Tending the Wild on the right side, they got thousands of years to co-evolve with this landscape before that disruption occurred. And both of these cultural stories give us a version of people who were nested in their ecosystems and learned how to manage them well for the long term together, and develop the cultural capacity and competency to skillfully do that. That's really kind of our long-term journey. Our composting at a small scale gives us a chance to reintegrate into that waste stream, to turn it into a benefit, to bank it in our soils, to enhance the functioning of that system, to care for the trees we have and that we'll plant, so that we begin to create a more productive, resilient, functional culture and landscape for future generations. How many of you heard of ecosystem services? All right. So before we get to services, we have ecosystem functions. See, services are things that scientists measure because they have benefits to humans. In many cases, we can put a dollar value on them, which makes them easier to communicate. Ecosystem functions are not for us. They are. They just are how life has co-evolved on our planet over billions of years to do things that are important. This is the biogeochemistry, how life transforms the stardust into the molecular structures of life and death and life and death, on and on and on and on. So carbon cycle, nutrient cycles, water cycle, these are big living elements that transcend individual life forms and that weave us all together and that we can learn to partner with, that we can learn to enhance. We can learn to help them function better. And in a place like California, where drought flood cycles are our future, what in the research they'll call hydroclimate whiplash, a whole lot of rain all at once and then no rain at all for a long time, and you've got to manage that, and healthy soil can infiltrate that rain and retain it, whereas unhealthy soil will have it as runoff into the gutters where it becomes a municipal liability, and then you pump water back uphill to irrigate the plants, and then you don't have mulch so it evaporates real quickly. And we can change those degenerative relationships, those ecosystem disservices, into beneficial services. So in the research community, they've organized these ecosystem services into 4 big categories with lots of subcategories in between. Start on the bottom left corner, we have supporting services, soil formation, photosynthesis, and nutrient cycle. Cultural services, spiritual and religious values, aesthetic values, recreation and ecotourism, mental and physical health. Provisioning, food, raw materials, medicinal resources, fresh water, and then regulating services, air quality, climate regulation, water regulation, erosion regulation, water purification and waste treatment, disease and pest regulation, pollination, and moderation of extreme events. So right now, many of these things, we have the disservice version of it in our neighborhoods. We have the unintentionally unplanned design of bad landscape and habitation patterns that have degraded the ecosystems that predated us and that have disrupted the cycles that life used to renew itself for eternity. In Sacramento, you can think about the elk herds. You know, it's called Elk Grove. There were 500,000 elk in the Great Valley 200 years ago. We got Antelope Road north of us. There were 500,000 pronghorn antelope in the Great Valley 200 years ago. The state flag has a bear on it. It's a brown bear. I've never seen a brown bear because they've been extinct since 1917, California, the grizzly. But there were 10,000 of them in the valley 200 years ago. The Pacific Flyway had billions and billions and billions and billions of birds on it, eating stuff and pooping it out somewhere else. The Delta pulsing, high water tables, springs and seeps all over the place. Now we've drilled down so deep, only the richest people can drill deep enough to find water in the San Joaquin Valley, and in places the land has subsided 30, 40, 50 feet from that extraction. So we've disrupted these ecosystem services. We now have disservices, but humans are capable of being regenerative, not just degenerative, so we can heal what we have disrupted. The same way composting can help to heal the soil cycles with the microbial communities. We can enhance the habitat functions of our neighborhoods to support birds and beneficial insects, pollinators, and predators and critters of all kinds, and people of all kinds who live in those places. So when you think about your compost hub, we want to think about it in its larger context. So if you see that little, well, maybe you can't even see it under the Hope Center, is kind of in the middle where we are. And this is an image that gives you the Sacramento River, American River confluence on the left-hand corner at Discovery Park. You can see the green belt of the American River at the bottom end of the image. And then these are all into North Sacramento neighborhoods. You can see freeways, I-5, and other places up here. So look at the urban forest up here. How green is it? What's the tree canopy look like? Imagine it's a year ago and like 3 weeks ago, last year, when it was 117 degrees for 2 days. How hot do you think it was up there? If there was water in the ground, how long do you think it stayed there if there was no mulch on the ground and there was no shade to protect it? So when you think about your site, I want you to zoom out, go on Google Earth, and look at it in a larger context. Imagine that place both in its physical attributes, when we think about planting trees, like what's your climate zone? What's your zone, USDA hardiness or Sunset Garden Book zone? Figure out where you are in the world, because that's going to help inform the plants that make sense for your place. Does it freeze or does it rarely freeze? Do you hard freeze? Do you have snow? Because those frost edges, that's going to define the species that can exist in your place. A lot of what I've got for you are going to be limits. They're going to be boundaries and edges that you want to create within. They're going to help focus you and direct your activity so you pick the right things. All right, so we zoom in a little bit more. Now we have more of a close-up of the neighborhood. The areas around here. And then we zoom in a little bit more. All right, so now this is the Hope Center and the block that it's on. When thinking about urban ecosystems, what I would want to encourage you to do is think about the area within busy streets as a contiguous landscape that you can think about as a whole unit. Your fence is an illusion, but that busy street is a boundary. And it's helpful to think about that larger context that your site is nested within. So when we look at the Hope Center here, we can see the streets below it and next to it, the backyards that are adjacent to it. And when you look at your site, you want to look at, all right, where are there big trees? Where are there buildings? How do people move through this landscape? Are there corridors that people use? Are there wildlife corridors? How does life move through this landscape? How does the sun move across this landscape? Where are the shadows? Where are the big, hot, sunny areas? Those are both vulnerabilities and opportunities in a changing climate. The hot spots with trees in them can have shade. If you don't catch the sunlight, it's going to hit the ground. It's going to have all kinds of maybe negative effects on the soil life down there. It's also going to grow weeds because that's their job. They're there to fill that empty space up to try to restart the development of a healthy ecosystem. And with compost and other thoughtful activities, we can jumpstart those processes and move them forward. All right, now we're in closer. So I want to kind of focus on the property here, imagining that this is what we're designing for and thinking about. You could think about your site as well. So where are there existing trees? We've got trees on the south end of the image in the parking lot in rows. You can see the shadows there. We've got one big tree in front of the building. Which way's the sun go in the morning? Where's it? And where's it? So imagine then the sun coming up over here and going across the landscape this way. The bottom of the image is south, so you're going to get more of the light coming that direction. And kind of just envision where the shadows are throughout the year. This is a really good skill to develop, to be able to walk outside on your property and to envision where is the light at summer solstice with the high sun, at winter solstice with the low sun, and in between, because that sunlight is the flow of energy that you can tap into to grow things. To sequester carbon, to create habitat, to create food for people, food for animals, food for soil. And much like the food waste streams are a flow that you can step into and grab that and turn it into something useful, that sunlight in the urban context is both a gift and a liability. Because if that's sun on the asphalt, now we've got urban heat island. But if we've got urban heat island, plants are going to bloom earlier. Growing season might be a little bit longer. There's all kinds of interesting effect that actually enhances biodiversity in cities because it buffers the temperature from the cold and allows things a little bit longer season. So there are opportunities and there are challenges in this environment. And then look in the back left corner in that big green open space, which is where some of the composting and gardening is going to be happening on this property in the future. If you were looking at what trees you want to put in, and we're like, okay, so how do I think about what tree to plant? Well, we can look over on one side and say, do you have irrigation? Or is there no irrigation? Because that's going to determine the tree that you want to put in that spot. Now, if you put a tree in a no irrigation spot, you're still going to have to supplement that water for the first 3 years to help it establish its root system. So you're going to have to commit to being its protector during the dry, hot summer season. But if you pick the right variety and you get it through those first 3 years, it may be then capable because it has the adaptation in its genetic memory and it has the site-specific management to help ease that dry season cycle to help it then become functional on its own. But on this other side, we have irrigated landscapes. In the urban environment, we have a lot of irrigated landscapes. We can grow a lot of things that you couldn't grow in an unirrigated environment. So then you might go, I want a fruit tree. I want a nut tree. I want something that needs more water, but then what is it going to give us for that water? What is it going to give the urban ecosystem in the more than human world for that water? Don't think about as much trying not to use water as thinking about what are you using water for? We don't have a limit of water, really, as much as we have an excess of expectations. And we think we can manage that with poor water cycle stewardship, being wasteful. But if we get good at it, which really is minimum level of competency for long-term habitation of the Great Central Valley of California, is to get to a level of mastery with water cycle facilitation, because we got super hot summers, we have one of the longer dry seasons on Earth, and we get a lot of rain all at once in the winter, and if it runs off our land into the gutter, you might get 20 inches of rain, but if only 3 inches went in the ground, you've got a high energy cost irrigated water you're pumping back uphill. So getting good at that context becomes key to it. So irrigated, non-irrigated, that's the first thing you can think about when you're looking at your site. And then if you're looking at irrigated, you're like, all right, I like fruit trees, but what kind of fruit trees do I like? And what time of year do I want to have fruit? What time of year do I have fruit right now? Because see, one of the beauties of this place is that right now we have year-round fruit harvests. You can have fruit fresh in your neighborhood from your trees every single month of the year. Now, there is an insect called the citrus psyllid and a disease called citrus greening or Hualong Bing that is gradually annihilating the citrus crops in Texas, in Florida, and in Southern California, but it's not up here yet, and hopefully the research community will get ahead of it. They're working hard But maybe someday we lose our citrus up here, and that's super sad, but maybe that happens. But other than that, you can still have fruit all year. So you gotta think about, what do you like to eat? When do you want it? There's all kinds of different fruit trees available. There's all kinds of different seasonal availabilities of it. And then you go, well, okay, maybe I want shade for the building. One of the reasons we plant trees in the city is to put shade in the afternoon, planting to the south, to the southwest, or the west of a building, to capture that afternoon hot sun, turn it into a shadow, reduce the summer heating costs. Leaves are dropped in the winter, deciduous trees, allowing the warm sunlight in through the winter. You get heating and cooling benefits throughout the year by the thoughtful positioning of a tree. The Sacramento Tree Foundation, with subsidies from SMUD, our regional utility here, provides trees to homeowners up to 10 for those purposes. So in that case, you could say, all right, well, if we want to shade this building, we'd want to put it to the west or to the south. We already got one to the south, kind of, so that southwest corner, well, now we're in the middle of the parking lot. So we have this area to the west, but that's where we want the garden. So now you get to places that have multiple uses, and you have trade-offs. And you have to determine what has greater value to you. Because maybe say, let's grow a tall, skinny tree that's going to cast shade, and we can plant a bunch of them as a row close to the building, so we don't have a big, wide canopy that needs a lot of room, but something that's narrower, and so then that can provide the sun benefit, but then everything to the west of it, up to the fence line, we can now use as gardening space, and that's going to get all the afternoon sun as the sun comes over. Now generally here, the afternoon sun is really hot, and if you can, it's nice to have shade in the afternoon to get your morning sun, your midday sun. Do you guys know what full sun is for a fruiting plant?
6 to 8 hours.
6 to 8 hours, whether that's a pepper, a tomato, an apple, 6 to 8 hours of good direct light in order to make fruit. If you have less than that, there are certain marginal things you can do, but generally you want to grow for a leaf crop, a root crop, or a shoot crop, not a fruit. Those are forest, understory, dappled light, ecological context. There are many useful plants, but they're not going to make fruits. If you plant a tomato in a place with only 4 hours of sun, you're going to get one tomato right now in October that's finally ripe, and that's it. It's math, it's accumulated sunlight day after day. So we have trade-offs with the places where we want to put things. And we have trade-offs in time that are going to change, because when you put a tree in the ground, it's a little baby, little cute little thing, and it doesn't take up any space, and it doesn't make shade for anything. More than anything, it's vulnerable to the sun, and it would like something to its west shading it so that its trunk doesn't get a sunburn and it doesn't get an owie that causes it to die. So in the early stages of planting something, you can use all that space for other purposes. You can plant other things around it that are going to live for years, and gradually that tree is going to get bigger and bigger. So whatever trees we're planting, we need to think about them through time as they get bigger, create more shade, more partial sun and full shade edge ecosystems under the tree, to the east of the tree, to the north of the tree, that you can plant different things into. You're creating microclimates, you're creating niches. And that's really the key word here, is niche construction. Humans can create niches. And in ecosystems, a niche is like, it's a good place to be for an organism because there's a flow of energy and resources that it can tap into. Think of the grizzly bear I mentioned earlier. Have you guys heard of Fat Bear Week? Did anybody see Fat Bear Week online? So some of the national parks up in Alaska that have grizzlies still and have salmon still, they have both. They put cameras up and you can watch these bears fishing. And they do competitions from skinny bear at the beginning of the season to super fat bear at the end of the season, and people vote and they crown the champion like Fat Bear. Because gorging on salmon is an amazing energy return on energy invested. It's called optimal foraging theory. It's a species learn to hang out where there's a nice, healthy return for their effort, because if you can't put out more energy than you get back from something. That's not a niche. That's the Sacramento's food system with 10 or 20 hydrocarbon calories behind every calorie that comes to the plate, subsidizing us, and we don't notice it because it's normal, but it's not a good long-term strategy. So the bear stands at the river's edge, lets the salmon come up to the waterfall that it has to jump up over, and just grabs that fish. And they don't eat the whole fish. When there's a lot of fish, what they'll do is they'll eat the belly and the brain, which have the highest fat content, and then they'll toss the carcass, and they'll get another one. And then coyote gets that part, or crow gets that part, or all kinds of other critters get that. And all these food webs spin off of it, and the bear gets all that energy. In your garden, you'll see praying mantises exhibit this behavior as they hang out under a flower. And they let the flower draw the pollinator in, and they're just chilling underneath it, and they just grab their food and eat it. They don't have to chase it, they don't have to run around, they know that the flower is gonna do the work. So in an urban context, we can create all kinds of niches for ourselves. We can create microclimates, we can create habitat for humans and for all kinds of critters and creatures, and we can get better and better at that. And as the system grows in density and complexity and productivity, we create more and more niches. That's how we can support biodiversity in urban environments. So generally in an urban environment, if you look at the neighborhood like around here, there may be not all that much plants that are that useful for the native organisms, because we put exotic plants that are mow and blow friendly because of the management choices that we make. But at the same time, humans are full of garbage, and garbage is food. And like your compost piles have rats, well, rats are excellent adaptive species. We call these generalists. Generalist organisms can make a living just about anywhere that there's a resource to be had. They'll figure out how to get it. And they tend to be organisms in the city that are not shy. Have you ever had like a raccoon step up to you? And like, it's just like, I'm not scared of you. I'll go run back into my gutter if I need to get away from you. So the organisms that are a little bit bold and that are generalists tend to do well in cities. And then there's other species that maybe like coyote that lives on the outside but will come into the city and use it sometimes but doesn't really live here. And then there's other species that are like, I stay on the outside, give me an ecosystem. So ideally our cities would be mosaics of healthy functional ecosystems of different types. Our green belts would be good habitat, our parks would be managed as habitat, we'd have pollinator corridors, we'd have native plant gardens in your yards, near your trees, near your compost pile, supporting all these different forms of life and food webs. And so we can create those to embed around our compost systems and to benefit the neighborhoods and the people on the other side of the fence and down the block and those species. So when you're looking at design, you want to think about how all these things are going to fit on your site. How are you going to move through the site? What other elements do you want on the site? How do you want to move material through the site? In 5 or 10 years, where do I want these trees to be that are still going to be useful? Or these native trees? Or are there trees that I have a shorter vision for? And there's something that maybe we can plant that's just going to be there for a while. One of the other functional roles of trees is called coppice. And generally, everybody forgot what coppice is, but coppice, which is kind of cut and come again tree management, they are trees that sprout, send up shoots, so you could take a willow tree and you could cut it to 8 inches. We call that a stool now instead of a stump. And then the latent buds down in that stool are going to pop in the spring, and they're going to send up vertical straight shoots. And those shoots can be managed at 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 9 years for basketry materials, building materials, fencing, poles, structural support. This is how indigenous and traditional people used to have a biomaterials economy that they were embedded in. In Europe, this was an anchor to society. It's also, through the use of controlled fire, cultural burning, how many Native American tribes impacted plants in ways that generated straight shoots that could be used for baskets, bows and arrows, and other useful things. So there are many people around the world using coppice to grow wood, to chip, to run into compost systems, or for other useful purposes. So that's another thing you could think about. So we've got all these different things that the trees could do for us. We've got all these different considerations of our site. And the final one I want to throw in is that when we put a tree in the ground, generally we want it to be something that makes sense in the climate that we live in. Well, the climate's changing. So, how do we play that? So, one level, with fruit trees particularly, we have something called chill hours. And these are the accumulated hours between 45 and 32 degrees from one measurement, or below 45 from another measurement, that occur between November and February. And they are calculated in California by UC A&R research stations that have in every county. There's one of these sites, or multiple, and I will be giving you guys a link to figure this out for your region. But you're going to have a ratio of the average chill hours, which is the rest period of dormancy for a deciduous tree. And it's essential that the varieties you plant get enough chill hours, because it's like if you ever had insomnia and you couldn't sleep and you went too many days without good sleep, and then you made bad choices, and you were all weird and crazy. Well, that's kind of what happens to the fruit trees. If they don't get enough chill hours, they don't flower right, or they make every flower they can possibly make, set every piece of fruit they can possibly set, and then drop them all, and then they don't flower next year at all. They just get whacked out crazy. So we generally would say plant trees that need chill hours within the average annual chill hours in the record for your place. But in a changing climate, maybe we will have fewer chill hours. Some years we may have more, but on average we might have warmer winters, warmer overnight temperatures maybe, higher lows is one of those things we might see. So generally what I'd suggest is figure out what the range is for your place and plant at the bottom edge of the range, so that you are well adapted to the future climate, not just the past climate. This also gets into what we call assisted migration, which is selecting tree species. Maybe you want to plant a native tree, but you can say, okay, I want to plant a native oak from my watershed, but if I want to plan for the future, now maybe I want to go 2 watersheds south of me and plant a cousin of that native tree that's adapted to a slightly hotter, drier climate. And so we move plants north, so that genetic material is moving, because the critters and creatures in ecosystems that used to move things around, we done extincted them all. So they're not there to do that work for us. So it's a role that we can play, something else to think about in your tree selection. All right. So, where do we get trees from? So I'm going to facilitate relationships to great sources of trees, and we're going to get the most for the money we have from this grant. To get the right trees for the right reasons, the right places on your properties and in your regions. So if you go to a commercial nursery, you're largely going to see deciduous fruit trees from the Dave Wilson Nursery. They are down in the Central Valley. They're one of the biggest growers of organic fruit trees for the commercial orchards, for the nursery industry, and for the home consumer. They are going to provide us with the ability to get a lot for our money and probably donate a lot of trees to help us out. So with them, we're going to be able to get a lot of good trees and much below retail. Because you guys ever buy trees retail for trees? How much does a fruit tree cost at retail? $30 to $70. 75. And the inflation, less tree for the money. So we're going to be able to get a lot of trees for our money from the Dave Wilson Nursery. They are primarily going to be bare root trees. Bare root trees are dug around the new year when they're dormant and delivered in January. We will get delivery to each region of a big bundle of bare root trees that'll need to get in the ground within a couple of weeks so they don't dry out. So that's going to be one of our seasonal waves of activity. And so we'll be able to get the right trees with the right rootstock. Do you guys know that rootstocks exist? So fruit trees, they tend to be these hybrid organisms. They are human monsters we've created for our benefit. So we take the bestest fruit woods and then we attach them. The cambium will fuse together so that we have rootstocks that are adapted to our climate, our soils, disease and pest resistance, and that provide that sizing. When you hear dwarf or semi-dwarf, it's the rootstock that provides that size regulation. Most trees we put in the ground will be on a semi-dwarf rootstock that's maybe 85% of the standard vigor, and you're going to manage that with pruning to whatever size you want. Full dwarf trees are cute and lovely. They tend to not live as long. Standard rootstock trees nobody sells because they're so big they're dangerous. That's the 30, 35, 40-foot trees at maturity. Nobody wants to get up on a 16-foot orchard ladder and fall off and break their back. So commercial industries, smaller trees, more trees per acre, not the big trees. So we'll be able to get rootstocks that make sense. So with Dave Wilson, look at this thing. So this is a harvest calendar. Every color is a different variety, like pears or nectarines or quinces or peaches or almonds or whatever it might be. And then every one of those lines in that slider that goes across, this is a May to November calendar, those are the different varieties in their harvest window in the Central Valley. So if you're farther north, it'll be a little bit later. But you can then say, all right, I've got this harvesting in June, I've got this in August, I want something in late June, early July, late July, and then I want something in November maybe. And you can look at the different varieties here, and you can select ones that are going to help you fill that harvest window. So you've got fresh fruit that's going to be available during that season, and you want to fill up as much of the calendar year with fresh fruit as you can have. A side note, you also want to fill up as much of the calendar year with native flowering plants that are beneficial to insects and critters so that their calendar is full of food as well, and then they'll come live in your yard year round. So think particularly late season, early season resources are the most beneficial because everybody's got lots of flowers May, June, July, August, September, but if you're in February and March and October, November, December, maybe there's less around, and so the relative benefit of something you plant is enhanced there. So Dave Wilson gives us all this good stuff to work with. Yes?
Do we get to choose, or is that choice already been made up by you and the team?
We looked at that, and originally it was like, let's pick 5 trees for every region. Let's make it easy. But then I talked to the regional coordinators, and I was like, everybody's context is different. Everybody's in a different geography, and different climate, and different land type, and different exposures, and different goals and purposes, and I was like, all right, let's not put all the energy into trying to figure that out. Let's create the access to diversity of options, and then let's look at tools to help you think that through, like all those design things we talked about, and the chill hours or the harvest windows. And then what we can do with like Dave Wilson is, all right, we want these trees, they're going to this region, which rootstock do you suggest? And we'll get you the right trees for your region through this.
So it's now October, and if you said in January, this is one piece of this system that we are creating, that there's a timeline on it.
Yes, you want to be thinking about these things. So I'm here to support that. So as much as you can run through these things, think about it. The resources I show you on here will be tools to help you make those decisions. And then we can go back and forth, and then I can go to my advisors with these companies. I've also got UC Ag and Natural Resources extension agents as advisors to this program. And they're going to be available in your regions. And you can also contact your local UC Master Gardener program. Every county has them. And see, what are you guys planting? What do you guys think are good varieties for whatever your purposes may be? With all those things together, we'll come up to some short lists and we can get those trees. They do have some trees that are available in planted rootstocks or in pots, so there's a different seasonality to it, but that'll depend on what they have available.
Thank you.
Yes. Another source, Planting Justice over in Oakland. How many people know Planting Justice? Excellent program. And so they bought, I think it was called Rolling Hill Nursery up in the North State, is the largest fruit tree collection on the West Coast. So, well, they have listed here 1,300 varieties of fruit trees. So they're another partner, and they have a really interesting diversity of things available. Some really cool, super weird, dirty stuff. And they're a great program. They're both in Oakland. They are coming to Sacramento, the old City Tree Nursery on the northern edge of Executive Airport. The city has given Planting Justice that property. It's taken a long time to get through the permitting and process to get it started, but they are going to be moving some operations into the Sacramento area. So we're also trying to build a partnership with them leading into that longer-term relationship in this area. So they've got a lot of interesting, rare stuff. You can look at their lists, figure out what you like. They ship. So similarly, we'll put it in order. They'll give us really good pricing, not as discounty as the Dave Wilson folks, because Dave Wilson is big. They want PR. You put a Dave Wilson sign in your yard, put it on the website, they're going to be stoked. They want to build partnerships and relationships. Planting Justice we want to support, and we'll pay them a little bit more, but they'll still give us really good deals. And so we've got their website. And then we've got the Felix Gillet Institute. Felix Gillet was the first nurseryman in California in the late 1800s. And so this is a program out of Grass Valley that has been hunting around the Sierra foothills, finding the abandoned 49er cabins and finding the fruit trees that have gone feral and are living on their own in the hills, and they're grafting and propagating them and making them available to you to put in your garden. So they got all kinds of cool plants. There used to be hundreds of varieties of everything, and now there's like 5. The level of loss of biodiversity in the food system is catastrophic and terrifying, and this is one way that we expand that.
Did the bloom help them? With the rain and the bloom that we saw of all of the native plants that came back?
I don't know. I mean, imagine so. I mean, anything up there, they're the resources they've got. So if you get a lot of water in the ground, they're going to have a bigger year, and they're going to have more life around them. But so there's someone, I haven't fully gotten in contact with them, but they'll be one of our sources as well. So these will be more select trees. You're not going to put all, your whole thing probably won't be from these guys, but this is a cool biodiversity enhancement, and particularly for the North and Central Sierra foothills folks, these may be some of the best adapted to your context. All right, more resources. University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources is your county resource for all kinds of support. It's not as big and expansive as it should be, but they've got a lot of good people in your regions, and they have a lot of excellent researchers and advisors that are there to answer questions for you, and they create a whole host of online resources. So this is the California Backyard Orchard on their website. If you look at that book cover, The Home Orchard, this was written by Chuck Ingalls, the late Chuck Ingalls. Chuck was one of the great fruit tree advisors in California. You guys know Common Vision, fruit trees at schools across the state, some of you? So Chuck was their advisor. Chuck was the mentor for Common Vision in their early days. So this is, a lot of gardening books are not from California. They're from other places with other climates and other cycles and seasons, and so they're useful, but maybe not as contextually refined. This is a California-based book, and it's based on the published research. The thing with UC folks, extension agents, master gardeners, if it's not in the literature, they can't say it. So what you're going to get from them is whatever they can validate and verify with peer-reviewed published research. So lots of great information. It's not going to give you the regenerative vision because this kind of research is challenged by complexity and by listening to feedback from the ecosystem and adjusting your behaviors. They need static behaviors contrasted against the control so you can see what happens different over time. So it's a different kind of system, but this is a lot of your best foundational information that you can then add kind of regeneratively minded stuff on top of. And so that list of clickable links goes on for like 2 more pages, and it's basically the content of the book on the website. So you will get this in the email from me. Here's the chill hours. This is from the Fair Oaks station. So you can see on that graph, you've got from 0 to 900 over the last 5 or 6 years. And it shows the beginning where it's daily hours. So each day they're adding the number of hours between 32 and 45 degrees, cumulatively February to March. And you can go on this site and you can put in dates and you can look at the historical record from your most local station to get an idea. Another partner, California Relief. How many people have heard of California Relief? Excellent. They're a statewide urban forestry support organization that supports all of the local organizations and does a lot of pass-through funding where they'll get the big grant and then they'll piece out smaller grants to community organizations to do projects in their area. They have an immense amount of resources, and since we are now a tree planting program, we qualify to become a member. So hopefully in the near term, we will become a member of Relief, and that will then give us access to their workshops and webinars for their member network and other events. They have a huge body of resources that you can access to learn from on all things trees, for fruit trees and shade trees and planting and care and nonprofits and planning budgets for tree planting and grant reporting and all kinds of good stuff. Here's just a glimpse. That link page goes on and on and on. So this is another link that I'll be sending you. And then we have the Urban Forest Ecosystem Institute. This is at Cal Poly. They are super data nerds, and they've been mapping the urban forests across California through a bunch of different lenses, using a bunch of different fancy modern technologies that we couldn't have done very long ago. And so they have a bunch of different resources and tools to visually look at the urban forest in your environment, to pick out trees, to find out what the native trees are for your area. So you can figure out, all right, what's native to my area, and then what's native south of me that I might want to look at for that assisted migration. They also have really interesting lists that they've created. So like here's the urban forest industry. They have 7 million city trees listed here, 223 different genera, 513 different species. So you can zoom in on this map to your area and see the things that are there and get all kinds of useful data. You can see the filters, county, climate zones, family, genus, place, species, zip code. So you can go to a zip code, see what the urban forest looks like, and see what it's composed of. And you can say, all right, well, what's there not a lot of that would be helpful for me to add in if I wanted to enhance the tree biodiversity in my neighborhood? They also have a tool called Select Tree, which is a search engine that lets you look at a bunch of different attributes, the maximum, minimum height, schoolyard, California native, fall color, power line friendly, shape, foliage type, leaf arrangement, leaf form, flower color, fruit type. Now, when you pull down the drop-down menu on fruit type, it's not going to say apples and pears and plums. It's going to use the technical terms for different structures of fruit, like drupe. And you probably don't know what those are. So it's an opportunity to learn and look up fruit types and find like Wikipedia and look up the different names, and you can figure out all kinds of cool stuff about the different structures, like if you're looking like botany style of flowers and fruit. So this is great. USDA hardiness, sunset climate zone, available planting area, water needs, sun exposure, all these different attributes that I talked about in the design phase. You can plug them in here and get ideas. All right, final bit here. iTree has the data tool that we're going to use for planting to record the trees, because urban forests are an important part of our lives, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Urban and Community Forestry folks and Davey Tree and other organizations, Arbor Day Foundation, they've created this suite of tools for individuals and for cities. So say if you wanted to see what are the ecosystem services that are going to occur because of the trees that are in my neighborhood, you could map all the trees in your neighborhood, input them in here, and then it'll give you calculations based on the best existing published research, which will have all the data and the math in the back end. It'll give you things. So we'll be using iTree planting. You can also use iTree species as another search engine to help you select trees that you might want to put in there. They have 6,000 different trees in the system, so chances are on the species level, like apple, not the variety like Gala, they're going to have all those different things in there to choose from, and you can see some of the assumed ecosystem benefits that will occur from that. Now, if you manage your tree really well, and you plant it really well, and you improve the site, and you do all the composting, good soil life stuff, and the mulch and all the things, the benefits that your tree creates are probably going to be greater than this baseline, because a lot of these trees get planted, nobody cares for the soil, the extra things that we can do, that I will help you do, aren't being done. So we'll try to create the best conditions for the genetics of that tree to express in context to fully realize its potential. So here's the iTree planting element, regional coordinators. This is something you'll get to learn about, and we will talk about this more in detail later. Do you have anything you'd like to add on iTree? Okay, great. All right. So you had like tree species, the size of planting, condition, the distance from the buildings around it. We talked about like planting to the south or to the west. So it's both like what are the benefits it can provide, and also if it's right next to a building, how much shade is that going to create that's going to reduce the sunlight the tree has to grow. So it looks at those, and then it spits out ecosystem services. So we'll come all the way back around ecosystem services. This program looks at the energy, carbon dioxide, air quality, and stormwater benefits, things that are easily given a dollar value, which is helpful for communicating to policymakers and others. So this program does it. So say you wanted to get another grant to plant a bunch more trees and care for the trees in your community, you could input them in here, generate an output, and then have all this useful data to put in your application, the benefits that are going to occur from that tree. And they have this at small scale all the way up to like cities scale data that, you know, the city of Sacramento could use for applying for a federal grant for major urban forest work. So I'm going to be available to support the planting, the pruning, and the tending, and the selection side of this. So we can look at how to plant trees well. As you see in the bottom right, do you guys know what a broad fork is?
Say that again?
The broad fork, there's those big blue tools there. It's an amazing tool for decompacting soil to enhance the ability of roots, water, and gases to move freely through the soil so that the tree can successfully establish in its context. A lot of our urban soils are very compacted and degraded. If you just dig a hole and put the tree in it, it's going to have hard edges around it that it might not successfully get through. So you see here in these middle images, I will tend to broad fork a 6 to 10 foot by 10 foot box around where I'm going to put that tree, decompacting the soil 12 inches to 14 inches deep to prepare that space for the first 3 or 5 years of that tree's growth. And then I'm adding the soil biology, and we'll talk about the things we do for planting and care at a later date. And then pruning, we'll learn the basics of pruning. We'll talk about the tools for pruning. There are amazing specialty tools, mostly made in Japan, that Americans don't know about that are very useful, because tools in America are based on planned obsolescence. They're designed to fail, so you buy another one. Japanese tools, these are made in iron towns that used to make samurai armor and weapons. They are multi-hundred-year iron towns with honor in their craft. And they make good things that can be fixed and repaired, and you will be blessed to use them. So I will show you hand tools and extension tools and how to care for them, sharpen them, and use them wisely, and where you can get them.
Get them within our scope of
We don't have funding for that.
next year?
Oh, this would be an additional grant. These are the things we can bolt onto. It's like Mr. Potato Head. We just got, extra things that are not in the base cow recycle model, but that we could get in the special version, I want the Star Wars Mr. Potato Head. So think about those things. Like one thing I'm doing locally is I'm partnering with the California Native Plant Society Sacramento chapter, and we're going to get free native plants for all of our sites to enhance those ecosystem functions and enhance the carbon and the benefits that are occurring there, because that's what they want to do anyway. And then we give them great sites to do it at, and we'll just look at how to keep expanding the benefits of what we can do. All right, so that's it. Questions, comments?
We learned it all.
Yes?
Do you have suggestions on how to prep spaces for planting next winter? Like, what can we do now to get our planting sites ready? Like adding mulches and compost?
Yeah. So if you were to go to an urban forest organization and plant a tree with them, what they're going to tell you is that we don't want to make the planting hole overly rich. Like, we don't want to plant a tree just in a whole bunch of compost, because the roots need to adapt to the native soil, they need to work for it, they need to expand and stretch out into their environment. So what I've tried to do is balance that with kind of our more regenerative goals. And so broad forking to decompact the soil is a really good thing. This is like the non-destructive version of a rototiller, where it doesn't annihilate all the soil life and cause an oxygen bloom to create a bacterial population explosion that burns up all your carbon and collapses the bulk density of your soil and makes it worse. But for a brief moment, it'll look like it made it better. So the broad fork is a great way to do it. Adding biology, so compost extracts are great ways to enhance that. Growing a cover crop is a great way to enhance the soil life. You could take the soil, broad fork it, throw a layer of worm castings on the surface, and then put some arborist mulch on top of it, and just let it do its thing, and then planting it a few months later. Anything like that is going to enhance it and benefit it. You basically, if you look under the microscope like Janelle does to the urban soils, basically what you see is sand, silt, and clay, the geology of soil, and then you see low biodiversity bacteria and maybe nothing else. So very low fungi, very low organic matter, very few predators. Not a lot of nutrient cycling. If you put a tree in that, it's got no friends, and it's just going to kind of struggle and try to do what it can, but it's going to be under kind of low level to moderate ambient stress every day of its life, and it'll be more vulnerable to diseases and insects, and it won't be super happy. So if you can enhance the microbial biodiversity, mycorrhizal fungi, spores are a great thing to add to the planting holes, or to add to the surface of your planting so that the roots can connect to those and build those relationships. And then getting good mulch on the surface. There is a difference in the mulch world. It's not so much in the compost as much, but with fruit trees, conifers and flowering plants are different. And there are different classes of fungi that decompose. Conifers have brown rot fungi. Flowering plants have white rot fungi. If you put conifer material, which every mulch you can buy, so here's a little secret. Everything you can buy for mulch is a waste product from industrial logging and conifer forests. So if you put that on your fruit trees, it's like from an alternate universe, 100 million years of evolution between them. It doesn't do the biological synergy stuff, it does the physical benefits, but not the microbial, synergistic, rhizosphere goodness. So if you get arborist material for free, it's a bunch of chipped wood from your neighborhood trees. The best material is called ramial wood chips. It's the 3-inch diameter and less branch wood. It has a high ratio of not just carbon, because it's full of cambium. If you put bark, or you put chipped up trunk wood, heartwood, it's all carbon. Carbon No nitrogen, doesn't break down. Just sits there in the sun, it oxidizes, it turns gray, and nutrients go up into the atmosphere rather than down into the soil. The other kind of mulch that you can buy, you guys see the funny colored mulches? Like they've been dyed, they're like black, and the house flippers love them, and it looks like modern. So those are primarily shipping pallets that have been chipped up and dyed funny colors. And about 90% of the shipping pallets are soaked in insecticide to extend their useful life. So not great material. So both commercial sources are waste products that you're taking away from you. So free material from the arborists, a high ratio of branch wood and leaf material. It'll break down, it'll create those dynamic relationships with the soil, and good things will happen.